Everybody, thanks for coming today. I love LASCON and like day 2 of LASCON. Like, how's everybody feeling? Yeah? All right, that's good. That's good. I know like lunch can kind of set in and like, oh yeah, day 2 but I love how LASCON like always keeps the energy all the way through the end of day 2. Like that's pretty cool. A lot of times you go to conferences and like by day 2 everybody's, or whatever the last day is, people are kind of like bailing or that kind of stuff. So it's fun to see that here. We always really, just kind of, sometimes I reflect on like, hey, Austin has really grown. People tell me this all the time. They're like, Austin has grown. Who's been in Austin for like more than like 10 years? So, okay, yeah, good amount, right? I sometimes think about like LASCON, right? Like we started it with the idea that we wanted to like put some sort of security content in Austin, which sounds really funny now, right? Like, because like now there's tons of security content all over the place, and there's just everywhere you go, there's content and that kind of stuff. But like that was our desire to put Austin on the map, because I think at that time we had like the traveling security conference that would do, T-Risk. That's right. So but we were like, we should have like one that's like here every year and like talking about AppSec type stuff and not always about data center problems or whatever like that, right? So not to say that data center problems weren't important. It's just what we weren't interested in, and so it was always kind of fun to be here and to be talking about it, and glad to really to be lucky enough to live in a city like Austin where we're continuing to grow and continue to do that. So if you're not from Austin, why don't you move here? I mean, you're obviously like one of us. You obviously like it here, so just come on. I mean, we're getting people moving here from everywhere else, so you might as well just come here too. So this will be great. Today, I'd like to talk some perspectives on AI and application security, some of the stuff that we've been learning through our kind of journey, and that I want to give you a couple like key premise. And like, how many AI talks have people been to this LASCON? Have you been to like more than 2? Yeah, more than 2, more than 5. Are all of them AI? We're all AI talks now at this point? Yeah, okay. Cool, so I may not actually tell you something you don't know. And so if you leave and you want to go to another talk, like I won't be offended. I'll just be like, oh, cool, maybe there's more food or something like that. Like that's fine. But if you're like still exploring it, or you're thinking of some components, like how do I put AI in my AppSec space, or like where am I wanting to leverage this in my workflow? Maybe I'll give you some ideas. Maybe I'll show you some things that you didn't know. If not, either way, still I appreciate you being here, but no pressure to stay on that. But okay, so yeah, I'm running Dry Run Security. I also teach classes on LinkedIn Learning, some stuff on like DevOps and DevSecOps, if you ever get a chance to see that. Unfortunately, sometimes people have told me like, yeah, I was forced to take your class by like and I'm like, oh, sorry, hopefully it was fun. That's all I can say. But sometimes, corporate, they'll buy like the training subscription to that, and then now you're forced to go watch me and Ernest act like idiots, talking about DevOps, and that's what, we're okay with that. So if any of this stuff is interesting to you and you want follow up on it, you can hit me up on this code, or my email is just james@dryrunsecurity.com. I'll email you like links to stuff, or like the deck if you'd like as well. So I want to share quickly like what Dry Run Security is and like how it kind of formed like some of my ideas and opinions on AI. Dry Run Security finds the needle in the haystack of all your all of your code changes, so that your application security teams can like stop risk before it starts. And we're not talking about like simple patterns. So like, I know that our industry for the last 25 years has really been interested in like finding patterns. And so if you were to think of some problem and say, oh, I really got to figure out how I can find whenever like a sensitive file is getting its encryption like changed or whatever. So you would start off by like writing a bunch of patterns, and you'd say, well, let's think of all like the Python decrypt methods that I could call, and you would fill out a whole page of that. And then you'd think, oh, well, what are all the ways that I have like sensitive data? And so you'd look for like, okay, like your social security numbers and other like PII and other things, and you'd write a whole bunch of like regex patterns in there. And then you'd like go and put that somewhere to have it run all the time. And then you'd have to repeat that for all the languages and stuff that you're dealing with. But if you think in behaviors and you start considering Yeah, but like that sort of stuff doesn't really help us all the time, and it actually misses a fair amount of things and doesn't inform what we're looking for. But if we were to say like, hey, does this pull request change the encryption of sensitive data? Like that is a different marker that we could look for. It's just natural language, and this is what we're doing with driver and security. So if you were to like rip out this encryption call and just sort of like make that method, and you were to just replace it with some sort of like hard-coded value there, like 1, 2, 3, 4, we could find like, yes, you had a variation in that that actually did change the way you're dealing with encryption for sensitive data, and so that's like a validation of your like behavior analysis there. And there's like 7 key lessons we learned. We kind of were starting to write up some of this and put it on our blog. So if you want to link to it, you can get it. So one is like, as we kind of started this journey over the last year, we started thinking like, oh, cool, we'll just like put some, whatever AI or whatever LLM system we could use on it, and we would just try to run everything equally through that. And all the different types of code policies and behavior analysis and all that stuff, we were just kind of jamming it all through one. That turned out not to be really the case. Like you actually need to pick, the right LLM for the right job, and we had some sizing that we did there for that. 2, we would sometimes take, or especially in early days, we would take our code change, or like what we thought was like, here's our pull request from the customer. We'd run it through the system, and we would get like kind of mediocre results back on it. Like we would get some analysis that looked good, but it turns out you actually have to ask the right series of questions to drive the LLM into the right spot there. LLMs don't have all the right answers. Again, this is probably not something that you don't already know, but they can learn, right? So adding in some knowledge-based feature using RAG or retrieval augmented generation there to add that in. We built a testing suite, so like we didn't have a situation where we would kind of consider one truth, and then later we would kind of get into this scenario where we were saying, oh no, we have this other problem. Like we didn't want to have that mismatch there. And we found out too that like LLMs are really good at summarizing behavior. We'll kind of be coming back to this throughout the talk, like the things that LLMs are really good at. And we wanted that to really be shown in the way we were using them. And we found that like that's something that while we can't do while you don't do all the pattern matching and things like that, like you can actually understand like what's going on in any particular change. And we found that like combining deterministic and probabilistic methodology works the best. And we kind of moved into this agent-based execution strategy for we're able to get it to perform. So we have all these lessons learned written up on our blog, and you can kind of take a look at that. But I want to take a step back and say like, well, where is this all going? And I want to try to convince you of this like key premise, and that is that the cloud was to operations as AI will be to security. And the first step to think about that is like, well, what really was the cloud to operations? And I think when we get in this, we have to first recognize like we did have like that whole thing called Agile. And Agile was a way to transform how we shipped code and how we shipped like product to people. And Agile really was in this spot where after, I don't know, it depends on like which timeline you consider as you think of like ops to DevOps and how that moved. But in like about 7 to 10 years of Agile, it's like we really felt like we needed operations to complete the full feedback loop here. And it did take about a decade, and I would posit that it also took a computing revolution to happen at the same time. So it was a meaningful thing. Actually, the first time like people were using the word DevOps was at like an Agile conference, and it was Andrew Clay Schaefer and Patrick Dubois, and they were like, "Hey, we should talk Agile and operations," and they're like, "Yeah, let's do this thing. Maybe we'll call it DevOps. So let's have a conference about DevOps, right?" And like a handful of people showed up in Belgium for that. And if you go back to that time period and we're considering, well, yeah, like, well, what were devs and security doing? Well, like, we didn't exactly get along, right? I know that's sort of like a trope that has always frustrated me, that we're like, oh, devs and security don't get along. But in many organizations, especially like in that early 2000s, that kind of had that feeling where we had that disconnect. And Tom Limoncelli, kind of retrospectively thinking about like DevOps and like how it came to be in his book on the practice of cloud system administration, volume 2. He has this quote, and he says, DevOps is this inevitable result of needing to do efficient operations in a distributed and cloud environment, talking about doing it at scale. And his whole point in that, and then he kind of goes on in this book to consider this, like, when we had tens or even up to like 100 machines that someone had to manage in a data center early 2000s, like that was like reasonable, like that could happen. But now we're talking virtualized systems, now containers and serverless, and we continue to move forward. But all that has really put the force to where, okay, like we can't do things the way that we did before. Or said in another way, agile, infrastructure as code, virtualization, cloud, those were kind of all like the necessary preconditions for DevOps to arise and to come into being. And so you could also think of it in another way that we didn't, thank you for laughing, thank you. This is the funniest slide in the deck. So if you're not finding this one funny, we're in trouble. So yeah, we didn't choose the DevOps life chose us, and that is my good buddy, Ernest Muller. When we were filming our course, they let us take silly photos, and so let's think about what this was for like in operations 2009. We had lots of time series data coming in. Developers were outnumbering their operations counterparts 10 to 1. We saw that they had a lot of complex needs, so you're dealing with like storage and compute and cooling and all those components. And operations in general had limited dev experience, right? Like you're kind of dealing more in like automated scripts and like kind of run books or like working through that stuff and not really interacting. I remember even in like early days of like the DevOps days here in Austin, like it was like, hey, maybe us operations people or security people should like use GitHub, right, or something like that, or we should use our source control management system and not just like put them all in shell scripts somewhere. And so we thought, okay, let's do it. Let's have our first DevOps Days event. And I was happy to be there to snap a photo of this. And and this is in Ghent. And back in those days, you would just like get like what's now like a DevOps Illuminati, like John Willis or somebody to drop into your conference and just like teach everybody there, like, oh, here's what infrastructure as code is, and like now we can like control all the machines with code. And I always thought like, okay, and I've said it here at this conference naively before, that like, okay, security is like, it's going to be like the next wave, right? And I thought like, okay, like it took ops a while, but then like in the next 5 years, security is going to make the transition. And we've talked things like DevSecOps, we have the shift left and other stuff. But I think we as an industry didn't really grasp how different like operations and security really is. Like it's not just like that's the next hop. There's a bunch of different things that matter to security. So if you think about like the current reality in security, right? It's like you have lots of data. This is document data, reports, lots of output that you're having to deal with. You have chronic understaffing, or you still face even greater exponential variance there from like the 100 developers to the 10 operations to the 1 security person. And you end up seeing like where people have like complex needs, like you're trying to do like a bunch of scanning and audits and reports, and all that data is kind of driving the rest of the problem in security. Oh yeah, and then like your security team now has to like be an expert in like dealing with the pipelines and all the infrastructure as code stuff too. And I got like a dozen plus languages or whatever that I'm dealing with. So yeah, I see some heads nodding, but does that resonate with y'all? Like, I mean, like that's kind of that reality that we've kind of put on them. And Steve Belovin says, like something's wrong in the security industry And he has this in his book, Thinking Security. He says something's wrong because we're protecting the wrong things and we're hurting productivity in the process. Like the breaches haven't stopped, things aren't getting better in that spot, and like we've actually slowed down dev teams. In fact, or in the early days when we were trying to get stuff going with driver and security, I would meet with some folks and like some developers, and they're like, yeah, like we have all these tools, these security tools, but now like the builds take like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, whatever. So we decided like, and they didn't clearly express it exactly like this, but what they basically told me is like, yeah, so now like we just sort of like batch all of our commits together and then like we like drop them in on like, on a Thursday or Friday or whatever. So you try to, like, oh yeah, that's not good, right? Because like that's one thing you learn from like DevOps is like smaller commits more frequently, like but that just provides more stability in the environment. And now we've kind of, because of the tooling bloat and the shift left that we've shifted on to developers, they've kind of had to move that way. So. So we were able to have the first DevSecOps event, and people were all kind of wondering why they were there. And we were often talking about like, oh yeah, we're going to shift stuff left, right? But we didn't always consider like who got that shifted to, right? Does that make sense, right? Like developers are like, oh, I'm not sure if I wanted to have access to this or to deal with this. So, okay, so what are some of the penalties that have shown up in the shift left, right? There's been a bunch of new gates and added complexity in many organizations. You have a lot of backlog bloat. We see devs trying to decode all the output that they've been given. You have a lot of pipeline cluttering showing up, all those stuff that I was kind of mentioning. And so I think all that's true, security in general, but then like what makes AppSec particularly even more difficult, right? There's 10. Wasps, there's 10, I promise. You count them, So there's no, I thought that would be funnier for this crowd. So anyway, so the noise to signal ratio is there, where we have like a lot of scanners and output that we have to deal with. We need expert analysis to like parse through all the results that we're dealing with. We continue to have more and more documents. And it takes like additional specificity and detail to be able to understand, application security problems. You can't just, toss that at that. And we still end up doing like a lot of pattern matching, rule writing, having to deal with all that output. Another issue with security is like how we imagine our applications, or how we do application security training. And so we often imagine it's something like this, like it's really a blast, and we're having a good time. It usually ends up kind of like this. It's like, hey, sign the checklist that you did the thing, right? Doesn't matter how it is at your organization. We all know how it ends. Yeah, see these, I really thought these were funny. So anyways, yeah, anyways. Anyway, so what are some of the things that we have, like in an application security context, that we could parse out and that maybe would be useful for like driving into like an LLM type scenario? So understanding like who wrote the code, what is the application actually doing that we're trying to understand? What are the areas of the application that are important or part of as it sits in like the wider organization, like how is it being used? And like what functions are critical, like need extra authorization on them, and which ones are not so important paths to the application? And thinking about like what did that secure training happen? Like what is the developer's relationship to the code base and to like our security program in general? Let's see, is that. And looking to see is the code brittle in certain areas, like where it is, where we need to like look for like different types of checks or things that it's doing there. So I think of this in the terms of like, we're actually not just caring about the code that's changing, but all the surrounding context that's going on in it. So like the who, the what, the where, the what's actually going on, and trying to take all that in. So contextual security analysis uses all the available context gathers. Developers are like actually writing the code to make all these contextually aware assertions about it. And so as we think about those pieces of like the actual pieces of data you have. Like you have like the commit or the PR that's being pushed in there. You know the author, that's another artifact of our system that we already have. We know we can isolate like which code paths are being impacted, which functions are being touched or modified. We can figure out like what dependencies are being brought in or also modified. If you have any like scanners or tool findings that you want to consider as like artifacts for that, that's also reasonable. And then, understanding like our bounties or like what we've paid out in like any sort of spots there, even if it's internal, like what we want to avoid regressions. So like what are the past problems that we've had? I like to think of this in 5 key areas, and I'll give you this acronym. So it's the surface, like contextual security analysis can be like the SLIDE acronym. So surface is like what is the surface of the application changes. So you can think of like routes and paths and functions and things like that. And then language, so understanding the language or framework that the application is being written in and like how that plays into it, like which ORM you're using or what templating language or templating library you're using. The intent, this is like the human side of it, like what is the person who's making the change, like why are they doing it? Were there a bunch of like tickets that like drove them to like make that change? Did they do this on their own? And how did that happen? Detection are all those automated scanning results and tools that you kind of are able to pull into that. And the overall environment, so the purpose of the application or service that's sitting inside of your organization. So let's think about like the stuff that AI does really well, and then we'll go back to our core premise, and then we'll talk through a few areas where we could explore this some more. So what are some things that AI does well? Well, it does good at transforming data. It does good at summarization, which kind of already hit in our earlier learnings. Extracting information from like complex data sets, like it does good at that. And we continue to see and we continue to learn that it's doing better and better at generation. And so have you played with like the latest models, like the OpenAI 4.0 or like O1 preview, if you've had access to that. Some of those things that are like doing the agentic stuff, so cool. Okay, so the cloud was to ops as AI will be to security. So what I try to prove is like we have like some data problems that are significantly different than like operations. In fact, it's unique to security in many ways, and we have an opportunity where like we're seeing kind of the ground shift like from this underlying layer. So just like where ops to be able to do like efficient operations at scale needed things where they could have infrastructure as code and virtualized systems and containerization and all that stuff. Like that was needed to like get ops into DevOps. And I think like we will see this. I don't even know. I don't even care what we call it. If we call it DevSecOps or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like that doesn't matter. The point is like we are seeing a big shift in like how AI is going to be leveraged in security and how security can take advantage of that. I mean, think of like CSPM. Like if 5 years ago, I was like, hey, we're gonna just take all that junk and like we're gonna aggregate and put in one dashboard for you and then we're gonna prioritize it for you. Like who's gonna be, put yourself 5 years ago, who's excited about that? Yeah, right? Very few, right? Because it's like, that's the solution we deserve, but it's not the one that we wanted, right? But that's what we got, right? And it's not wrong. We're trying to deal with the problem and it's trying to deal with that. But like what we want is like systems that you don't have to go in that way. Where you don't have to like just not munging all the data together and seeing a single pane of glass. So thank you for whoever laughed for that. It's good. This is, Lord of the Rings is alive here. I'm glad. So yeah, but like taking this is that other approach, right? Stuffing all the tickets in our backlog there. Okay, so how does this affect like information security in general? So we see that we can stop some of the security burden for engineering. I believe that's something that we'll uncover with AI. We're going to continue to augment the security engineer to both reduce their toil and scale their effectiveness in organizations. And we're going to see continued insight for security into what's going on in engineering. Because just as much as like as that outnumbering is happening, there is a continued code velocity that's growing. And like, let's say your code's changing, let's say you got 100 engineers, your code, they change once or twice a day to the code base, you're looking at like 1,000 code commits or pull requests in a week for your, like in a work week. And that's true today. But like AI augmented developer, next 6 months, a year from now, like that could be 4, that could be 8, that could be a dozen, right, of changes that they're making every day. So we're going to continue to see code velocity and the volume continue to grow, and so security needs some sort of way to see through that, to figure out like where is risk actually happening, how do we understand that. And if you haven't seen the James Bertotti video, he takes off-the-shelf SaaS tool and just GPT-4 and was like running a comparison to see like how they could do it. And it's kind of funny, and he sort of styles it together. But then that turned into the LASCON application security testing tool. And so that's one to check out. If you're interested in any of the stuff we're talking about, you just drop in your like OpenAI key or Anthropic key in there, and you're able to get a scanner set up just using the last tool. So okay, I'll put on my readers here, but just to get an idea for like what kind of prompt he's using for this, he just prompts it as like, you are an application security expert skilled in explaining complex programming vulnerabilities with simplicity. You will receive the full code for an application. Your task is to review the code for security vulnerabilities and suggest improvements. Don't overly focus on one file, and instead provide the top security concerns based on what you think the entire application is doing. There's a little bit more setup in there in his prompt, but I thought like that's kind of the meaningful bit of it. Has anybody tried like stuff like this type of prompt and then running code through it? I got one hand, two, few. Okay, some more on this side. Okay, good, yeah. And so, anybody shout out if you feel comfortable shouting out? I don't want to put you on the spot, but like, good, bad, has it been working? Yeah, somewhat. Okay, good. Over here, yeah.
Good and bad.
Good and bad. Yeah, it's kind of mixed, right? You can get a lot of data. Did I have somebody else saying stuff out back here? I didn't mean to. Okay. Yeah, you kind of get a mixed bag on that, but you'll get some pretty interesting results. And this is one approach you can do, is like you're learning to come in for a code base. I know some like red teamers or pen testers will do a lot of this nowadays to kind of get an idea like footprint and overall like setup there. One method, if you're not familiar with like CoStar prompting, I thought I would just sort of go through like how to do that. This is one that I find to be pretty useful whenever I'm trying to build out a prompt for something for the first time. But you make sure you tell the LLM like, hey, here's the context of it. Here's an output example. Have a lot of specificity. Also, really try to give it the style of like what you're looking for. Give it a clear task. Set the tone. Make sure that you include items around like what assumptions you're baking into it as you're asking for something, and the audience that you'd like it to be presented for, and then the requirements and the response. So you're able to say like, kind of give it that framing there. And this is easier. I think this is good. You can also do this through like a multi-series things if you're actually like hands on the keyboard through it, like you're working with the prompt and continue to do this. I'll find myself like starting out with part of CoStar and then kind of like, oh, I need to add I got it wrong, so I need to show it like the kind of response that I wanted, or like here's an example of the output that I'm looking for. Okay, yep, and then the other one. Has anybody had a chance to play with Jason Haddox's GPT that he has on OpenAI? I know some. Okay, got one. Okay, good. All right, you're like you got all this stuff. Then you're good.
He was in Vancouver and presented that.
Okay, yeah. So I think this one's a really good. It's our Arcanum chat security bot, I think is what it is there. You can set up threat modeling with it. You can have other types of engagement with it. I think like this is one where it sort of proves out like just like how you can have that augmentation if you're like looking for proof of like what is a OpenAI or a GPT like useful for in my system or for my setup. This is one that I actually haven't played with, so I actually hesitate with putting it up there, but it's an open source one. But it is like helping you do like threat modeling in Stride. And so it seemed legit. I've heard other people recommending it, but this is one that I hesitate on. But has anybody played with it by chance? No, not on that one? Okay. And then the one that I would highly recommend is Fabric. Has anybody got Fabric up and running, or do they run Fabric? 1, 2, 3, anybody over there? Okay, cool. Yeah, Fabric's really great. They just in August, Daniel, they relaunched it where it's like all in Go, so it's like a lot easier to install and get up and running. I thought we could walk through just like a sample of some of the stuff that they do. It's community driven, so like lots of prompts are shared in this, and like you can do all sorts of stuff. And it's not just for security, but there are some really security implications. And you can chain a bunch of prompts together, feed one to the next, and it's super cool. So we'll look at one that's inside of Fabric, and this is one for just summarizing pull requests. So the identity and purpose. Oh, I really like the way the Fabric setup works, and I really like how Daniel writes prompts. So this also helps me think about it, just like setting these breaks for it. But you're an expert at summarizing pull requests on a given coding project. You kind of say, that's what you're doing. You let it know. And then he gives it some steps. So first, you're going to create a section called summary and place a one-sentence summary of all the types of pull requests that have ever been made to the repository. And then create a section called top pull requests and create a bulleted list of the main PRs for the repo. And then he has an output example here, so where he shares the summary. So most PRs in this repo have to do with troubleshooting the app's dependencies, cleaning up documentation, and adding features to the client. This is the output example. So like he's telling it, like, I want you to show me output that looks like this, right? And then it could say, here's my top pull requests. They're, and putting their short summaries of what they are. So those are some components of like how we can think about doing prompts. Those are some different tools that are open source for that. Like I've mentioned, I would totally recommend checking out Fabric. Like it is worth it, fun to play with. There's a few pieces of academic research as well. So these are not without some controversy. Although I should have got some quotes from Clint's latest newsletter, because there's some other research coming out. But we're seeing people at least make claims that LLMs can do things. I know academic papers can sometimes be like not so as rigorous as we would like to hope that they are. So I've linked to like 2 points and some of the controversy around those. So if you want to get into that, the idea is like we're driving towards this point. Like we're seeing like where LLMs can go for this. And then here's another one, like, can LLMs patch security issues? And then we think this one is like a more promising paper as well. So to rehash some of this point of like where operations needed the cloud, security is going to make the same change with AI. Like the types of data documents that security has right now, like we have policies, we have that we keep in our organization, we have our procedures and all the controls we have written up. We have all the architectural decisions that we've like documented somewhere, hopefully. Did I get a chuckle? It's funny. Yeah, okay. Was it meant to be funny? But yeah, right? I know. Yeah, we just we often just fly through that. But we have the output from all of our tools. So that's continuing to be another place where like having to adjust that. The threat models that we've created or that we could also generate like through AI, but at some point like we have an idea like what those look like. And then we have our industry standards that are really outside of our control, but we need to consider those as part of the documents that we have to deal with. And then we have our data events, right? So changes to all the previous categories. We have all the code changes that we have to deal with. We have the infrastructure changes, and we also have industry news or anything like that's modifying that. And so these are all the things that I think are in scope for like as AI continues to make its shift across security and continue to pull that across. So, okay. So the cloud was to ops as AI will be to security. I don't know if I convinced anybody, but if I kind of did, or you think I got the point, would you give me a raise of the hand? Or yeah, okay, a few. Mostly skeptical. Yeah, so I didn't know that I had as much time as I did, so this is where I am on my slides. If you want to grab the GPT Painter, I have the DevOps Painter available for you, and you can make these as much as you want. And you're like, oh, I can make much funnier ones than that. We also have a contextual security analysis guide, if any of that was interesting to you, and I'm happy to send these slides. Or if you want to chat more about AI and security, here's my contact info. So, All right, so that's it. Yeah.
Time for questions, so.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we have time for questions.
We have time for questions if anyone has a question.
Yeah.
If you could pick like one place where we could implement like AI today for like my team, right? We're thinking about a number of different ways. Where would you say like a small team could start?
Yeah. Could you give me an idea of like what challenges you're facing? Like when you go through the list of all those like documents or the kind of the changes?
I mean, I would say everybody I talk to, friends, and my program, we're chronically understaffed. We have a lot going on. We got a lot of demands, and we have to create documents. We have to review findings. So I'm trying to find like where's the most bang for my buck that I can start implementing something that can help, be a force multiplier.
Yeah, that's good. Cameron, you put me in a hard spot because I would say, hey, you should check code changes because that's what dry run security does, right? I think that is one spot. Obviously, we wouldn't have started a company around that if we didn't think that was important. I do think I really like a lot of the stuff going on where people are considering like threat modeling and driving down threat modeling to not do self-promotion. I like the stuff that people are doing in like the threat modeling space and driving that into like developers and like using that as an option. There's some of the open source tools for that could be a spot. Yeah, I don't. Does anybody else have any? I mean, we can also have other comments on that. I don't know. What do you? It's kind of like hard to just say like where do you start with that, right? It's like you kind of try to find the most pressing issues where you could instrument that in your pipeline.
We're leaning towards contextual enrichment on findings.
Okay. Yeah.
Giving the developers more information so that they learn and can fix the vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Than having that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's those are two spots, right? Like the developer, we have to like if we have enough empathy to understand like the developer comes into any security finding and like has no idea what's going on. Like how do we enrich that? And then I think the opposite is also true. Like something pings and you're like, okay, like this we have an issue and security now has to drop in on a code review or something, and it's like, well, I'm not a TypeScript expert or I'm not a whatever, and now I have to like look at this weird library that I've never seen before. Where if like we could have some summarization of that. I think Daniel Miessler's stuff around like in Fabric has a couple of those components that you could probably pipeline in for that would give you enough prompting to help stub that in. Yeah.
At the risk of getting the same exact answer as what just did, for a smaller company that has little to no security budget, maybe it's something that was in your presentation or not, what is something or tool that a developer can use to further their education or even make an argument for a larger security budget or something like that?
Oh, to make an argument for a larger security budget?
Yes.
Okay. What'd you say? Well, I would say I will not repeat that, sir. But I think if you're taking some of those open source projects like Fabric or even like the SecGPT, those could be like angles for it. I don't know. Those would be like places to start to look at it, and then looking at like there are some like no cost, low cost solutions like they can like plug in inside of like GitHub or whatever system you're using. If you want something like this more like developer native, I would say that would be like good places to look. Yeah.
I have a question. What challenges do you think that AI will never be able to solve in the future in application security?
It's hard because I would have said all the stuff I just presented a year ago. I would have said that it would have been really hard for it to solve. Right? Like I really thought like we could like when we were kind of drafting out a lot of this with me and my co-founder Ken. We were really considering like how AI could help us in like some of the chat stuff and like how we're processing things, but we continue to see generation continue to get better the way it can look across all the data segments. So,
But if you want to be a specific, To be a specific, if you want to be a specific, like name one challenge.
Yeah, one challenge we have today, but I'm not sure that to say that it'll never will. Like that was my gap there. So I think the problem with AI systems today, when we're looking at like event-based data, that's actually really hard for it to keep up now at scale through just like the raw compute that's needed for that. But I'm an optimistic guy. I think like maybe that could be overcome in the future. So I have a hesitation to say like, hey, we can't ever like drop it in there. But a lot of the use cases that are applying like AI and kind of like a API security or WAF stuff or whatever like that, like you can do some of it, but like I think it'll have to get better before it can really be that. Yeah.
Hey, I was going to say, I feel like a lot of AI tooling that is not in a fully autonomous system relies on a human in the loop who trusts the output.
Yeah.
How would you go about cultivating confidence in an AI system so that security analysts and engineers use it in the way it's meant to be used?
Yeah. So you're saying, you were asking like, should you without like a human in the loop?
Well, once the human is in the loop, how do you get that human to trust the system to use its output and not lose efficiency, if that makes sense?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Some of the ways that you can gain like trust through, sorry about that, the light's pretty bright. Yeah, some ways we try to gain trust for the user is being clear about like what we actually looked at, what files were touched, what methods, and call out specific detail around like what that was. So having the right specificity level for that is important. Making it still where a human really is still in the driver's seat. Like, so like, hey, there is a certain level of risk that we discovered, but like you can still force a merge, or you can say that's not relevant because of whatever, we applied authorization filtering somewhere upstream or something like that. And those are ways you continue to build trust, where you're not just saying no, the code review system says no, you can't push, and then now you're blocked and unable to do that. Right, so it has to act kind of more like a human. I think like that's one of the things we and most of the products in this space are always trying to figure out like how do we help it be more like a human code reviewer instead of just sort of like how we've always treated it, to where it's like we're, oh hey, this matched this pattern, so it's bad, so we reject, or we allow. So yeah.
I want to give you an answer, by the way, to the question that was just asked.
Yeah.
I don't know if we need the developers or human to trust. It's like using Copilot today. They don't need to trust it. They need to look at it, and that's why it's called Copilot and not Autopilot. Right?
Yeah. It keeps the human in the loop to that point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't need to trust it. You need to appreciate that it's another point of input, and probably a good one, and maybe it's wrong, like the Copilot.
Yeah.
More questions? Anyone?
Okay. Hey, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of LASCON.